Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give it another few minutes for more people to dial in, and then we'll start with our presentation. Okay, I can see the numbers slowly increasing, but conscious it's now 12:30, so I think we'll make a start. Okay, so firstly, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this CIHT presentation on inclusive mobility, understanding LGBT and travel experiences. My name is Philip Santos, and I'm chair of CIHT West Midlands. I'd just like to add that please note that this will be a recorded event. So if you've got any concerns with that, now would be a good time to either continue or log off. So Elisa, next slide, please. So with regards to the agenda, obviously we're all keen to hear our fantastic panel of speakers today that includes Richard and Lindsay, and ask any questions we may have. But before I do that, I just wanted to take this opportunity to have a shameless plug, really, for the CIHT. So next slides, please, Elisa. So we are a charity of around 14,000 members. We've got 12 UK regions plus international groups, and we were awarded our Royal Charter in 2009. So the last 2 years have shown exactly why I became involved with the CIHT. Next slide, please, Elisa. So we provide advice, guidance, support to our members on things such as professional qualifications and general regional support. And I think this latter point is worth just spending a bit of time dwelling on. So it has been a really difficult time for many people within our highways and transportation region. Hopefully we're coming out and seeing shoots of recovery, which is great. But as a committee, we are here for our members. We represent a very varied and wide industry and provide excellent links for networking. We also have an online platform called CIHT Connect, whereby you can be part of a virtual community. It allows for our members to share ideas and ask questions in very informal settings. Our members also receive the Transportation Professional magazine. So I won't go into too much more detail on those slides. I will shortly hand over to our committee's EDI representative, Rahman. I do say this at every EDI event, but Rahman really does provide the great drive needed to make sure such important events and topics like this do get discussed and shared amongst our members. I'd really just plead with you all to give some serious consideration about joining our regional committee or getting involved with somewhere that might be a bit more local to yourselves, as the benefits really are wide and varying, and it really is a great opportunity to get involved and help drive what is really important to our members. So Rahman, I'd just like to hand over to yourself now, please.
Thanks, Philip. Hi everyone. We're just gonna run through a few slides just to show you how CIHT is actually really committed to the EDI agenda. It is one of the highest priorities within the organization. CIHT believes in the power of inclusion and a commitment to making a difference through becoming a key influencer in the EDI agenda across the transport and infrastructure sectors. Inclusivity is at the core of their values, and it's as strong and as important as professional, collaborative, and progressive values. Next slide, please. Here we've also listed some of our EDI actions to date, including looking to appoint an EDI manager to ensure momentum is maintained. We have also developed a diversity and inclusion toolkit for employers and the diversity and inclusion charter, which has been signed up and endorsed by over 70 highways and transportation organizations. Next slide, please. This is like a short summary of what we have been doing in the EDI space in the Midlands since I joined at the beginning of 2020. We've kind of trying to implement on the ground what the CIHT Diversity and Inclusion Charter sort of like fosters and sets the foundations of. And we're just trying also to encourage the EDI agenda to be further developed in other regions in the UK, not only in the West Midlands. As I said, every all these presentations we organize, like if you do think or feel that we need to cover some EDI aspect that is really close to your heart, like please like let me know, messaging me to this email address. Next slide, please. So one of the main reasons why we are organizing this event this week is because it's Trans Awareness Week. And we're doing this because we think that the best way of helping our trans colleagues, which is probably the most discriminated sort of like faction or section in the LGBT community, is sort of like showing how they are struggling and how us as a profession and as transportation professionals, we can help make those issues more visible and address them and make sure that we try to help a little bit as much as we can. So without further delay, we move on to the next slide, please. I'll introduce Richard Adams, which is a transport planner at Atkins, and Lindsey Stack, which is a principal transport planner at Atkins too. They're going to talk about their research and the work they've been doing on understanding LGBT plus travel experiences. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah, okay, it's all good,
yeah,
Lindsey.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so yes, thank you to for the opportunity to present today, and thank you for everyone for joining. But yeah, today we're going to be presenting the findings from a recent research study that Richard and I have been doing. It's been all around travel behaviour and experiences of the LGBT plus community. So yeah, this piece of research, it kind of came about from a conversation between Richard and I about 11 months ago now, and Richard was explaining to me that as someone who identifies as gay, he often felt apprehensive in public spaces and when using public transport. And I found this really surprising, and it's perhaps my own ignorance, but I hadn't really thought about how LGBT plus people might feel on public transport or in public spaces. And I guess I wrongly assumed that Richard would feel confident using public transport because he works in transport. And yeah, it was something I hadn't really thought about before. And Richard and I were wondering if this is something that perhaps other LGBT plus people experience. So we did a little bit of sort of quick Googling and had a little look online, but we found sort of practically nothing in this area. There's sort of very little data around how LGBT plus people feel, particularly on transport. So we decided we would have a look at this in sort of greater detail. So we designed a research study which focused on sort of collecting literature that was already available in the area, and we did an online survey just to try and understand whether this was something that was experienced by other LGBT plus people. And we've then taken our findings and sort of spoken to various sort of transport operators and LGBT plus community groups. So yeah, we're going to talk through some of the findings that have come out of our study today. So I will hand over to Richard, who's going to discuss some of the findings from our initial literature review.
Thanks, Lindsey. And I think as Lindsey highlighted that, public personal safety in a variety of contexts has really been put in the spotlight, I think, in the last year. Several high-profile events which have sadly happened, which has, I think, led a lot of us to question personal safety in public space. Like Lindsey said, we've had a conversation. Lindsey's females has had her own, experiences. I myself, as cisgender white male, have certain privileges, but also, as a member of the LGBT community, there's those things I have to grapple with. And we know that this is a wide problem, but like Lindsey said, we started off by sort of diving into the numbers and seeing what was out there. And we know that, you know, the LGBT community is quite a pretty large cohort, actually, even though you think, you know, 2.2% of the population doesn't sound like a huge amount. That does equate to 1.2 million people. That's the ONS estimate as to, you know, and obviously LGBT is a huge umbrella that covers a wide variety of people. So yeah, it's obviously, we know that it's a largely understudied area. TfL are one of the few transport authorities that have done some research into you know, experiences of LGBT travel behaviour on their public transport network in London. And we know that fear or intimidation or abuse was a key concern highlighted by LGBT transport users in this study, and that public transport was one of the more common locations where respondents were not open about their sexual orientation. Again, not surprising. And I think one of the more sobering statistics is the fact that nearly 16,000 people suffered hate crimes, according to Home Office statistics, where sexual orientation was a factor in the preceding year. Yeah, I think there's some quite stark statistics, but I think statistics only really, they're the tip of the iceberg, really. If you want to move on to the next slide, Lindsay. because I think where we've really struggled in terms of data, it's like, okay, we've got these numbers which just really show how stark the issue is. But it doesn't really, it sort of scratches the surface, really, because there's all these factors that add up to influence how people travel and experience the public transport network from not just an LGBT perspective, but I think that can apply to almost anyone. As I said before, LGBT social identities are something that's quite complicated and fluid. It can interact between gender, sexuality, race, religion, so many other factors that interplay with that. We know that certain cohorts of the LGBT community have particular issues in terms of public safety, and there's been quite a few, you know, obviously as Ramon highlighting, you know, Trans Awareness Week, there are a few studies that have looked at you know, trans safety on the public network, our public transport network, and highlighted that actually, yeah, this group is one that's particularly vulnerable when it comes to using public transport. Even though, again, I'd say the statistics highlight that men are more likely to suffer violent crime, but it really highlights how perception of crime and perception of safety is so key, particularly around women, non-binary, and trans individuals. But it's also sort of highlights that, you know, these statistics show that, there's all these issues that affect the person, but it doesn't actually highlight how the person actually navigates those issues or navigates public space, and the way and the means and ways in which they interact with the environment and adapt to make themselves feel safer. You know, that's a massive understudied, you know, area that's not been studied, really. It's only, again, we've only just scratched the surface. And we know from available research as well that different environments evoke hugely different responses in terms of safety, particularly around time of day. But particular types of public transport, particularly buses, highlight feelings of vulnerability. So that's a really interesting statistic, you know, that's a really interesting finding that's come out of available research we really wanted to explore more. So next slide, Lindsay. So we sort of tried to break this down a bit and think about, well, we're designing transport schemes and we're very good at looking at things like journey time, cost, reliability, but how do we capture those, you know, more personal and intimate factors that really have a fundamental impact on how you travel? So we've called those the subjective drivers of travel behaviour, the things that impact you as an individual and how you experience public transport, which hopefully, as Lindsay will go on to in a second, our data will hopefully highlight these factors. But we like the term travel horizons to sort of encapsulate, it's how all these things come together, and it's someone's, you know, capacity to travel in a certain way, and it really, you know, sort of highlighting, you know, all these things that come together that impact the way people travel and the choices they make, really sort of governs how they can travel, where they can travel, when they can travel. And it's all about understanding the quality of the journey more than anything else, arguably. So without further ado, I'll hand back to Lindsay to go through some of our findings.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Yeah, so earlier on in the year, back in May, we ran an online survey and we asked sort of LGBT plus charities and various transport operators to publicise this. So this was just about understanding whether there were issues that people face on public transport, and the survey was open to everybody regardless of their sexual orientation or level of transport use. So just to try and understand whether this was an issue faced by certain people. So yeah, in terms of the survey findings, I guess of all the respondents, more people felt safe than unsafe on public transport, which is obviously really good, but there was still quite a high proportion of people that said they didn't feel safe. And we also asked people if they or the person they were travelling with had ever experienced an attack or incident in the last 5 years, to which 37% of respondents had, and over half of those had experienced multiple instances. And then, yeah, 80% said they thought this might be due to their gender or sexuality. But yeah, what was quite clear was how few people reported incidents when they happened, and so people talked about how they felt like it was either not significant enough to report, or they felt like they might not be taken seriously. And of the few that did report the incident, they weren't satisfied with how it was handled. So from this, we took away that, you know, our research did have legs, and we've got evidence here that there is potentially an issue and that there is room for improvement in terms of making people feel safe and reducing incidents, and just making sure that incidents are reported. So as part of the survey, we asked respondents if they had any concerns and what the biggest areas of concern were to them when travelling on public transport. So the main area of concern was disorderly or threatening passenger behaviour, and this was sort of all around just not knowing who you might encounter when you go on a bus or a train. So like a lot of the open text responses to this question were about where people had experienced a previous incident, and that had really sort of put them off travelling on public transport. But the other key area of concern was sort of lack of lighting and just a physical environment that felt unsafe. And we found this question quite interesting, because I think a lot of the things that you might typically consider as things you might want to improve on public transport, like unreliable services or CCTV, were actually sort of things that weren't the top areas of concern. So we don't often look to make improvements on public transport that do sort of look at passenger behaviour. So yeah, we thought this was really interesting. Yeah, so in the literature review, we found that the LGBT plus community often feel like they have to avoid being sort of themselves and sort of have to hide their sexuality in public spaces. So this is something that we wanted to explore, whether this is also the case on public transport. So 76% of LGBT plus respondents said they avoided being open about their sexual orientation. And a lot of the open comments here said that they didn't feel safe displaying affection, and it just, you know, it felt safer to try and blend in and not sort of draw attention to yourself. And we also found 19 out of 29 trans respondents said they'd also avoided being open about their gender identity on public transport. So I think what this tells us is that you can't always rely on the crime statistics. So, you know, people often are using their agency to try and avoid there being a problem in the first place. So, you know, we do have to be careful about statistics under reporting issues. And, you know, we also have to ask ourselves whether, like, we are happy that people have to, like, they feel the need to sort of avoid being open about their sexuality or their gender identity. Sorry, my doorbell going in the background. So yeah, still on the theme of changing behaviours, so 59% reported that they've changed their travel behaviour in the past due to safety concerns. So this was higher again for female respondents, but also trans respondents too. So I mean, some of the ways people said that they did that were sort of not travelling by public transport at all, or moving train carriages. Some people said that they just avoided travelling by bus or rail or metro at all at night time, and they would sort of rather walk home than catch the bus. And yeah, as Richard mentioned earlier, this kind of links in with sort of other things that we've seen in the news, and I think it is really common that people, like, the onus is often on people to change their behaviour to sort of feel safe rather than making improvements to safety. So yeah, one thing we asked in the survey again was about how inclusive people felt public transport is, and also how we can go about sort of making public transport more inclusive. So I think the main things that came out of this were people wanted to see greater staff training on LGBT plus issues. Some wanted to see sort of greater police or staff presence, but sort of mixed views on the police side of things. But also there was sort of the physical environment side, so you know, better lighting at stations, safer routes to and from stations and hubs, and also more secure waiting facilities. So the final part of the survey sort of asked people for if they had any sort of further comments, and I think what we found really sad was that some people felt like prejudice against the LGBT plus community was sort of commonplace and deep rooted, and it's not just specific to public transport, it is an issue sort of in a wider field. But I think the key point here is that, like, while many respondents feel these issues are a reflection of society, like the difference is that the environment isn't in their control, and comes back to this thing about when you get on a bus or train, you know, you don't know who you are going to encounter, and you're kind of in that enclosed space. And yeah, it's just, yeah, I think as a transport industry we should be trying to make people feel safe when they're on public transport. And yeah, many respondents said they'd also like to see greater messaging and campaigns from transport operating companies about how they will take a zero tolerance approach to hate crimes. And yeah, we're already seeing that in action from quite a lot of transport operators. And yeah, we'll come on to it in a second, but TfL, for example, have been running a campaign over the last few months about hate crimes in general and having that zero tolerance. So yeah, it's really good to see that becoming more widespread. I will just hand back to Richard.
I'll unmute myself. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, thank you very much, Lindsay. I think we're really, you know, obviously whilst some of the findings are quite sobering, obviously it was great to get all this data and have real deep dive into these issues, and actually seeing that what Lindsay and I were discussing at the start of our research was backed up by what our respondents were saying. And I think, like we say, like it's sad that we have to deal, you know, as an LGBT community, we have to sort of deal with these issues day to day. But I think what we can do is really challenge those assumptions and challenge, you know, why should we have to normalize these things on public transport? What can we do more as transport planners? We design these schemes. What more can we do as an industry to actually tackle these and create those safer spaces? Well, you say we may not be able to do anything about the prejudice that itself, but making those environments safer and more inclusive is something we definitely have the power to do. And that's what we're hoping that our research will really highlight. So hence why we ended up taking our findings to various stakeholders to sort of engage with them, see what's being done already, what sort of best practices out there already, and then sort of identifying those gaps and what could be, you know, for future research or, you know, future scheme development, that sort of thing. So I think obviously we engaged with TfL, already quite active in this area, and the image on the left hand side is a sort of poster that I sent to Lindsay whilst I was on the tube. I noticed, oh well, we're doing this research and they have this Together Against Hate campaign. So I think traditionally those sort of campaigns have been focused on staff members, which obviously is still very important, but it sort of widens that narrative to, you know, it's not just we won't tolerate abuse of staff, we just won't tolerate abuse full stop, and that includes passengers of all, you know, of all different creeds. And I think that sort of messaging, you know, that change in messaging, whilst it can be quite subtle, like, you know, it's pretty powerful. So we'd love to be able to, you know, obviously seeing TfL sort of leading by example in this area, you know, we'd really like to see this, you know, rolled out across other, you know, public transport networks as well, this sort of messaging on, you know, that whole community, and make, you know, including passengers in that zero tolerance campaign. I think we also quite liked the term mainstreaming diversity that one of our stakeholders also coined. He had done a lot of work previously with TfL on bringing in the, you know, the Pride buses. So we thought, you know, obviously the idea of mainstreaming diversity is if you improve conditions for one group, then you improve conditions for all. So I think that's the thing that really stuck with us. It's like, it's in everyone's best interest for these, you know, these schemes to be put in place, because it sort of guarantee, you know, it sort of safeguards everyone as well as those vulnerable groups, and it's sort of getting that critical mass behind it, really. So there's quite a few other extra bits of research ongoing. We've been liaising with the University of Westminster and ARUP on a queering public space project, which looks at how we can design public space, you know, how we can make public spaces. So that's not just public transport, it's also thinking about our streets and our squares and the places that we use day to day, how they could be more LGBT friendly. And then this, you know, Atkins doing another piece of work on Get Home Safe, which is developing toolkits for you know, local authorities to actually assess their streets from an inclusivity perspective, because there's a lot of tools out there already, such as the walking assessment tool, Healthy Streets, things like that, but it's putting that real inclusivity emphasis on it. So yeah, lots sort of going on in this sphere, but I think especially, you know, we've done the research, but it's still sort of early days for us. So I think the question remains really about where do we go from here. So Lindsay, perhaps if we move on to the last few slides. So yeah, it's sort of returning to, like I say, I think we hope that, you know, we've sort of we know our data has really shown what, you know, what Lindsay and I were thinking at the beginning, and that this really does have legs, and there's more that we can do in this area. And I really hope that this sort of empowers professionals within transport planning, within highways engineering, to really think about how inclusive our schemes are and what more we can do as an industry to drive forward that positive change. You know, whilst we recognise that a lot of these issues are reflective of society in general, sadly, it's noting that that environment is something that we do have control over, and that these are the very environments and the carriages and the stations and the pavements and all these sort of things that we design day to day that I think we can have some positive influence on. And just noting as well, from an operations perspective, you know, public transport operators do have that duty of care to passengers, and I think they can really, as TfL are demonstrating, really lead the way to, we might even be able to get that shift of, you know, getting that more positive change in society, reinforcing these messages that these public spaces should be inclusive for everyone. And it's, I think there's many avenues that we've uncovered here that we could bring about that change with. So probably, as way, you know, by way of conclusion, we've sort of come up with a few recommendations as to how we can take this forward. Obviously, there's always room for further research, and we'd be very open to, you know, any more research opportunities, understanding people's experiences even further, more detailed analysis of how people navigate the network. But there's so many other things as well that we can be doing. Environmental design, as Lindsay showed in our findings, is something that people really highlighted as important. As simple as providing better lighting, visibility is a key one, making sure there's lots of, the people, there's no like hidden corners and there's good sight lines, that sort of thing. These things are really key for people to feel safe. So there's a big focus there on, you know, landscape architecture and urban design. I think there's lots that can be done in that field as well. As we said, reporting and zero tolerance approaches, developing those codes of conduct, I think are really important, and understanding how operators can meet the needs of LGBT plus transport users and other vulnerable groups. Empowering staff as well, giving them the knowledge to act upon safety issues and to act in the best interests of LGBT people. I think there's also something around local transport policy as well, and mandating these changes, because we're aware that, okay, we recognise the issues and wouldn't it be great if we could solve these, but how do you actually bring about that change. And I think local transport policy has a big part to play in that as well. The way we appraise transport schemes, I think, is a big one. We know we have things like equality impact assessments that we use day to day in transport planning, but can we use those more? Are there things like the Get Home Safe tool and enhancing those auditing tools that we use day to day to assess the environment and design our schemes? Is there more that we can do in this area? And of course, there's always consultation as well. When we're designing our schemes and putting them out to the general public, are we doing enough in terms of making sure that those vulnerable groups have a seat at the table to make sure that those schemes are actually meeting their needs? So I think, yeah, well, thank you for your time. We've really, I say, like as usual, you know, we've really enjoyed speaking to you today, talking about our research, and really looking forward to some questions. And as I say, I think this is one of the quotes that we like to end with, really, from one of our respondents, and we really hope that this is the case. I think when we improve the transport system for one group, we actually improve it for everyone. So just to reiterate, we really hope that our research and our development points can be taken forward and really bring around positive change. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Richard and Lindsay. That was like a very insightful presentation. I really enjoyed it personally myself. So again, thanks for that, for your time. I do have like 3 questions here that have been submitted. While we go through these questions, I would like to encourage the attendees of the webinar to actually send some more and see, you know, we can get the most from this like this time we're spending together. So the first question has been sent is, how do you think like CIHT can help to actually like, you know, promote this agenda? All the findings you've been like finding from your research so far.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the CIHT are already doing so much to promote things in a wider field anyway. So I think you're already doing so much, and I guess just giving us the opportunity to present this today, you know, it's really appreciated.
Yeah, I think I think that obviously, like,
it's not meant to be a tricky question, then it's not to be a tricky question, just like to actually how like CIHT probably wants.
Yeah, I think more events like this. I think being able to talk about these and have a captive audience is so important. And using like Trans Awareness Week, for example, we've got LGBT History Month, things like that, as a platform to talk about these problems, you know, the research that we'd be doing. I think there's a question around, obviously we've come at it from a transport planning perspective, so we often talk internally about, okay, we often appraise transport schemes using these methods. What can we do to change? It's maybe, can we ever talk more about highways design, you know, the tools and techniques that we use to design schemes, transport schemes, and actually, like I said in my last slide, it's like, okay, well, how can we actually improve that? I think that's still an unanswered question. So I think it's this, we can continue this sort of engagement and putting the word out there, but then maybe there's those other activities as well. I'm not entirely sure exactly how that would happen, but I'd like to think that, you know, people like CIHT, along with, you know, RTPI and all these different organisations that are involved with the whole sort of planning and highways design, urban design, all those sort of things, I think they all have a part to play. So no, it's a very good question.
I think actually this ties quite well towards the second question that was asked, which is like, how do you think like we could move away from compliance towards more a 360 design? I think what this means is, yeah, effectively, like, we know sometimes when you design things, it's like there's like a minimum sort of parameters where you design things, and I think the scope of this, the whole discussion we've been having, it's like, one, I don't think there's like too many sort of like guidance, but also like even if there was a guidance for these things, like how do you assess that as actually satisfactory? So I don't know, it's a bit of an open-ended question, I guess, but
it's another good question. I think, like we tried to show, it's that we need the evidence, we need the data. I think there's definitely merit in that, is having some sort of, I think like we, again, shameless plug here, but the Getting Home Safe tool that Atkins are developing, which is sort of taking walking route auditing tools that we like the industry, or it's already industry standard, but then adding this extra, okay, but are they thinking about that inclusivity aspect and personal safety aspect? So I think there's that side of it. And then, like I said as well, it's whether you need to mandate these things. So it's whether local transport policy has a role, or even from national level, whether in terms of, I think there is a balance to strike, obviously, because I think there's a lot of different, in terms of performance, there's a lot of metrics out there, and I think there's, so it's whether we need to take a look at that, and whether from that side of things, like from the policy side of things, there's actually, ways and means of, enacting this. So again, very good question. Not sure I can provide a complete answer, but I think there's, more than one answer to that.
Yeah.
Ramon, if I could very quickly just pick up on a couple of those themes, because I think it's absolutely valid. I think talking about mandating policies and trying to do more, I think the sheer fact that we're having these conversations now is quite a leap forward, and I'm certainly extremely proud for the CIHT West Midlands that we are trying to drive the EDI agenda and have regular meetings like this. And I know we're trying to have a full programme of events coming forward. But I have noticed that we've got quite a lot of people that have dialed in outside of the region as well, up and down the country, really. So I think it'd be great if we could just continue these discussions. So anyone that is on this presentation today, if you can take it back to your local teams, have those conversations, because I think the more awareness that we have of this, and the potential direction that a lot of the fantastic research that's been carried out, and I should say as well, you're being very modest, you did win an award yesterday internally at Atkins for this piece of work. Just get that in there. We should be very proud, and just to continue those discussions, it can only sort of strengthen this whole field of inclusive mobility going forwards.
Well, thanks very much for that, Philip. That's I completely agree. I think that obviously this research came off the back of LGBT History Month, but I just remembered the reaction, sadly, to the Sarah Everard case. There was this explosion, this real outpouring of, there's a lot of, obviously this shouldn't have to happen, but I think there was, through such a tragic event, it's driven forward a lot. People have really thought about, are our public spaces safe? What can we do better? So it's things like that. It's a shame that these things have to happen, but I think that I think a lot of good's come out of it, and we're thinking about how can we collectively make our environments better, safer, more inclusive. So, like I said, I think it's fantastic we've got people not just within the West Midlands attending today, and I just completely echo what you're saying, Philip. I'd love to, just drive this forward further. We just need to keep driving it forward.
Thanks. There's another question that's actually kind of dwelling a little bit more into the sort of standard sort of like space. So the question is there anything in any published guidance, such as Manual for Streets, that needs changing to help members of the LGBT plus community feel safer?
That's a very good question, and I think exploring Manual for Streets would be a really good starting point for us. It's something that we haven't looked at explicitly in our research, but I think it's definitely something that is definitely need to look into more. I can't say off the top of say I'm calling myself out here. I'm not entirely sure exactly what's in the Manual for Streets in terms of inclusivity, inclusive mobility, and design of streets. Again, something that Getting Home Safe colleagues at Atkins are developing this toolkit possibly looked into this as well, but I think that's a very good point to raise. I think one that, probably need to look into a bit more, actually.
Getting ideas here.
Yeah. That'd be a great start. That'd be a great starting point, because I think obviously that's a design reference that everyone uses in their day-to-day work. So I think getting to that, that would be the aspiration. I think if we could take a look at Manual for Street. Absolutely. But want to revisit, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Another question we've got is, what are your immediate steps you think you should be following in terms of your research? So what's next? Like, as in, like, oh, you've done this now. So I know this could be like a long way ago, like to work on this. But what's an immediate next step you think you're gonna follow?
Again, great question. I think it's highlighted the need for. I think we've gathered a lot of data, but I think we can do more. So we've got a couple of lines of inquiry at the moment, working with data insight teams in local authorities, potentially looking into ways that we can run some further research. I think doing a really deep dive in terms of ethnographic studies, so we're doing that, getting that really detailed, rich, qualitative data to understand how people, obviously we've done this sort of more high level study, but I think it's understanding, okay, getting to that sort of deeper level of understanding as to about how people, you navigate the public transport network, and maybe looking at specific examples of environments where those changes can be made. Carrying on work with local authority, public transport providers as well, I think would be really key. The police is an interesting one. I've got contact for the British Transport Police, and I know that in the LGBT sphere, sometimes I think there's this bit of tension between the LGBT community and the police. I think historically we've not always seen eye to eye, to put it lightly, and I think there's definitely more that needs to be done there. And I've just thought, Lindsay, I don't know if you want to add in there, because I've just literally forgotten what I was about to say. So I'll try and read it.
I guess the other thing was we've been working with TfL, and we've asked them to share the data on sort of the success of sort of the campaign they're running at the moment, because they're actually expecting to see they're actually hoping for an increase in the crimes that are reported, because that's what they're trying to encourage people to feel confident in reporting issues. So we're hoping to get some of their data and sort of learn from how their campaign has been running. But we'd love to do some more research. I think our first survey was smaller, and it was kind of about just testing if there was issues. So we'd really love to do just collect more data, really, and like Richard says, maybe sort of do something like use ethnography, or sort of do some focus groups, and just sort of try and dig a bit deeper, and just understand how people feel. So we're really keen to take things further.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And like your colleague said, manual for streets would be great if we can get. That's the aspiration. But like you say, we haven't got a tangible product. I think there is that element of, okay, well, how do we sell this to potential clients? I think we're not at that stage yet. It's whether like you say, it's whether we influence how auditing tools are developed or enhanced, like you say, consult on manual for streets and similar design guidance, that sort of thing. I think that's definitely one for the future as well. So I'll just add that in.
That's great, thank you. We don't really have any more questions, so I'm gonna ask again and see whether any of the attendees here has any other questions to our panelists that I'm sure they will be glad to respond to. And if there's nothing, well, then we just stop it here. But I personally think that it's been like a really insightful. I can relate to a lot of things you've been saying, and maybe a question I have, like, for myself, I would say, do you feel like, because I see the issue from the side of the LGBT side too, and I completely get what you're talking about, and I wonder if this was perceived as a more like a public issue. If you would think like there would be more action towards that from from transport authorities, for example, and instead of only being an LGBT issue as such, if you know what I mean. Do you think like there's it's the discussion is more wider than only just be, there's still some sort of discrimination in the line there, like if it's not going to benefit the majority, or it's not seen as a benefit for everyone 100%, which is, I think it will, but it's sort of like gapping that sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I sort of highlighted the sort of mainstreaming diversity idea, is trying to find that common ground. I think the more critical mass you can get, the better. And I think our research has highlighted a lot of common areas. So like lighting, for example, is something that in the Getting Home Safe piece, which focuses on women's safety, there's that crossover between actually environmental design, I think, is a key one, where it meets all these different criteria. Where I think there's issues, and I think that's highlighted recently, I think it's a real shame that, for example, there's been various sort of gender critical views out there, and there's a lot of toxic debates around trans inclusivity and gender critical, I think the sort of toilet argument, for example.
Yeah.
So I think those areas where, sadly, I think that's become a very toxic debate, and it seems to be this sort of there seems to be this dichotomy between different groups of the population, which I'd love to be able to see resolved, because I think ultimately we want to make everything inclusive for everyone, but we have to listen to those groups that are most vulnerable, because you can't just ignore their needs and say, oh, it's not convenient. Let's not, I think we've got to have a lot of frank and difficult conversations as well. But we've hoped that we've highlighted a lot of things to make, that can make positive change for lots of different groups. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
And also, I think it's not always shown in the sort of crime statistics. So a lot of this is about how people feel and their experiences, and like that data isn't collected, so it's hard to know whether there are issues when it's not fully reported in the crime statistics. So
yeah, you may get like abuse, but you don't necessarily report that every time you got abuse, or you got
exactly
felt uncomfortable because you just don't want to be, you feel embarrassed, or because you just want to move past it. And so yeah, I just think like what you've done here is just like truly remarkable, and opens the door to like this discussion. So yeah, I definitely would like to see more on this. So you have my full support there, and you definitely have the platform here. I'm sure like Philip agrees that we do have have the doors open from CIHT to present and discuss anything you progress on this side. So we don't have any more questions. So I think probably what we're gonna do, unless like Philip, you have anything else to say. I think we have a couple of slides after this, after the question and answer session.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Ramon, Richard, and Lindsay. Truly insightful and quite inspirational presentation there, so thank you very much for that. And just to reiterate, yes, absolutely more than happy, but whenever you've gathered more research or have any other presentations you'd like to give, then please just let myself and Ramon know. I would be more than happy to facilitate that. We'll just wrap it up now. So final information points. For anyone that would like to know a little bit more about CIHT, we've got the link there, ciht.org.uk. If you'd like to know more about memberships, again, the email address is there. You can outreach out to us by either the regions at ciht.org.uk email address, or the direct one, which is just at the bottom there for West Midlands. And please feel free to do get in contact with us. And I think LSR, that takes us on to the end of it now. So thank you very much everyone for joining. Ramon, Richard, Lindsay, thank you again for all your efforts on that, and thank you to everyone that has dialed in today. It's very much appreciated, and let's help spread the word and get that momentum going as well on future discussion points. So thank you very much. Hope you all have an enjoyable weekend, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone.
Bye bye.